This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW, flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 562, entitled Masculist Teaching of Women to Hate Women Who Commit Massive Gender Crimes Against Men. Description. This flyer explains how Masculists are aiming to teach women a hatred of those women who commit massive gender crimes against men, so that a combined male-female overwhelming moral force is applied against such gender criminal women, so that women are powerfully motivated not to be gender criminals at all, so that female gender criminality is wiped out. The flyer itself. Masculist teaching of women to hate women who commit massive gender crimes against men. By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I believe that any reasoning person of either sex who is well informed of the horrific gender crimes that women commit against men learns to hate such women, seeing their gender crimes as so horrible that they should be hated. It's one of the fundamental roles of the Masculists to teach women this hatred, so that these horrible gender crimes are wiped out, so that women feel a terrible moral pressure on them not to commit such horrible gender crimes, or they will pay a terrible price. They will not get a man, and they will be cast out of society, made manless, sexless, loveless, babyless, and viscerally rejected. In the current state of masculist knowledge in society, the majority of women are poorly informed as to how women commit horrific gender crimes against men, since feminism is largely a solipsistic, gynocentric ideology that teaches women nothing about how women oppress men, and certainly does not teach women that in fact women oppress men far worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes against men last decades, which makes them far more serious than the rather minor ways that men oppress women. Masculists are angry at the monoconscious bigotry of feminists who preach to women that gender oppression is a one-way street, that it is women who are the oppressed and men who are the oppressors, which is a profoundly biased and bigoted approach to gender politics, which paints men as the bogeyman and women as innocent victims. Whereas the reality is much more in the opposite direction, since many of women's gender crimes against men are deeply parasitic, brutal, and callous, that deserve to be hated and should be hated. Masculists attack monoconscious feminists when they come across them, especially in feminist public talks. Typically, a masculist will stand up in the audience and harangue the feminist speaker, saying such things as, quote, "You feminazis preach that gender oppression is a one-way street. Well, it's not. You women oppress men far worse than vice versa, since many of your gender crimes against men last decades, which makes them more serious than the minor ways that men oppress women." To Masculists, even rape, which is one of the worst ways that men oppress women, is seen as rather small beer in comparison to the big three ways that women so badly oppress men, that is, with women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, women's forced fathering. To anyone studying these three horrific gender crimes committed by women against men, comes away with the impression that these are indeed horrible gender crimes that need to be criminalized and should be hated. We Masculists are fed up with the sheer hypocrisy and bigotry of you monoconscious feminists who know nothing of masculist ideas, who spread monoconscious propaganda against men, when in reality it is you women who are the far greater gender criminals who commit these massive gender crimes against men. We masculists are so fed up with your hypocritical bigotry that we are now punishing you severely where it hurts you the most. That is, we masculists are targeting your boyfriends, teaching them masculism so that they become bi-conscious. That is, they have both their masculist and their feminist consciousnesses raised. They are already male feminists since they are your boyfriends. So by teaching them masculist ideas, they become bi-conscious, which causes them to see your feminist monoconsciousness, in brackets, if you don't become bi-conscious faster than your boyfriends, close brackets, as bigoted and hypocritical. These bi-conscious boyfriends will then become disgusted with you and then dump you. So over the next decade, millions of monoconscious feminists are going to lose their boyfriends due to their inability to come to terms with the rise of masculist ideas. We will see a repeat of what happened in the 70s, but with the sexes reversed. In the 70s, millions of women divorced their husbands because their husbands were unable to adapt to the new feminist consciousness of their second wave feminist wives. In the coming decade, millions of bi-conscious masculists will dump their monoconscious girlfriends because their girlfriends will be unable to cope with the rise of masculist consciousness, which is so critical and hateful of monoconscious feminazi bigotry. These bi-conscious ex-boyfriends will decide that it is better for these bi-conscious masculists to dump their monoconscious feminist girlfriends and to take up new relationships with bi-conscious feminist girlfriends who have a good understanding of masculist ideas and who share the masculist hatred of the massive gender crimes that women commit against men. Thanks to the educational effort of the masculists, over the coming decade, millions of women will be taught to hate those women who commit these massive gender crimes against men, so that a supply of freshly minted bi-conscious feminist women will become available to be selected by bi-conscious masculists for relationships. These bi-conscious feminists will replace those monoconscious feminists whom these masculists despise and reject, dumping them with contempt, seeing monoconscious feminists as MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, and shibbers, that's SHB, equals sexist, hypocritical bigots, who do not deserve a man, thus putting powerful moral pressure and punishment on monoconscious feminists to become bi-conscious or pay a very heavy price, that is, not getting a man, hence being made babyless, a severe punishment by men, by masculisted men. As masculist ideas spread across the planet, millions of women will be made aware of the level of horror that women cause when oppressing men for decades of men's lives. Millions of women will be taught of the big three ways that women oppress men and made very conscious of just how evil and criminal these big three gender crimes are. That is, women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, and women's forced fathering. The masculists will be pushing women to become conscious of the horror of this gender criminality of women and threaten women with manlessness if women don't become bi-conscious and utterly reject such female gender criminality, or they'll be forced to rot on the shelf, spat at by men and rejected totally by society. In today's world, most people have a hatred of Negro slavery, but most women do not have a hatred of manslavery, since they have not yet been taught by the masculists just what a horror it is. To masculists, manslavery, that is, a man working for free for a woman for decades of his life, is 1,000 times bigger problem than was Negro slavery, given the numbers. Yet Negro slavery was the root cause of the US Civil War that killed over 500,000 soldiers. To masculists, manslavery generates hatred in their eyes They have a hatred of manslavers and utterly reject them, spitting in their faces, yelling abuse at them. Manslaving parasites, gender criminals, fluffy vermin, and the like, making it very clear to these women that these men are masculists who want these manslaving women wiped off the face of the earth, forced to die a slow, miserable death by being forced to rot on the shelf, rejected by society. Similar masculist hatred exists towards women who divorce rape men, who don't bother to fip up, then take their divorcing husband to the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court system and have him butchered, divorce raping him. Such women are hated by the masculists, and as masculist ideas spread, so will millions of women also hate them, seeing them as divorce rapists, as parasites, as gender criminals who deserve to be hated and rejected. The same logic applies to women who commit the gender crime of forced fathering, forcing a man to pay for a kid he never wanted in the first place, which is why the masculists are pushing for political and legislative changes that will make such gender crimes illegal and criminalised. The masculists want the creation of GECs, that's GECs, Gender Equality Committees, in the parliaments that consist half of feminists and half of masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are treated equally. The male half of these GECs will legislate the PARA, that's paternity rejection right, so that men are not forced into unwanted fatherhood. These GECs will legislate the OPTAB, OPTAB, obligatory paternity testing at birth, for all births to block paternity fraud. A paternity frauding woman will be given 15 years in prison for her gender crime. That is more serious than rape, that usually gets 10 years in prison. As millions of men and millions of women learn to hate women who commit these massive gender crimes against men, then women will be much less inclined to commit such crimes, so that this kind of female gender criminality dies out, as it should and as it must. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man's Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 560 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.